There are rooms that remember your tears, walls that echo your silence, streets that still know how your footsteps sounded when you were breaking. You can't heal in the place that broke you. And yet, we try. We stay. We overstay. Like moths in love with the flame that burns us. We keep returning, hoping the fire might change its mind. But pain has a memory. And the spaces that shattered you, remember. They remember your softness, your surrender, your silence when you should have screamed, your compliance when you should have walked away. Healing doesn't begin where you lost yourself. It begins in the wild, far from familiarity. It begins in places that don't know your name. But the problem is this. You've built a home inside the wound. You've mistaken survival for sanctuary. You keep offering your presence to people who only remember you as an emotional resource, not a soul. You keep showing up in conversations that never deserved your voice. Relationships that fed on your need to be needed. Rooms where your light was currency. And your absence, a threat. But let me tell you something sacred. There is power in becoming less available. And that power begins with absence. With silence. With retreat. Not to run away, but to return to yourself. They told you love meant being there always for everyone. But no one warned you what that would cost. You became the lighthouse, never realizing how much oil it takes to keep burning for others in storms they created. Every time you said yes when you wanted to say no, a part of you dimmed. Every time you picked up the phone at 2 a.m., held someone else's panic in your ribcage, absorbed chaos like a sponge in a sea of desperation, you lost a little more of yourself. And the world clapped. They called you kind. They called you strong. But strength built on self-abandonment is not noble. It is corrosive. You mistake exhaustion for purpose. And wonder why peace feels impossible. Your availability became your identity. Your constant presence, a drug for those unwilling to hold themselves. But you were never meant to be a rescue boat in every storm. You were never meant to be so easily reached. Not because you don't love them, but because you cannot bleed endlessly for others and still survive. Not every call deserves to be answered. Not every emergency belongs to you. There is a violence in overgiving, a quiet death in being always reachable. Sometimes, the most sacred act of love is saying, "Not this time." The truth is uncomfortable, but here it is. People don't value what is always available. They value mystery, distance, scarcity, not because they are cruel, but because familiarity dulls perception. You gave everything. You were always there. Always reachable, always responding. And in doing so, you became invisible. In psychology, it's called the law of diminishing returns. The more someone is exposed to a stimulus, the less impact it has. Apply that to your love, your kindness, your time. When you overextend, you dilute your presence. You teach others to expect you, but not to respect you. You condition them to believe that your soul is on standby, your heart a bottomless well. But you're not a product. You're not a service. You are a limited miracle. And miracles do not knock twice on the same door. So you must learn to withdraw, to become deliberate with your attention. Because what is sacred becomes so through rarity. And the most magnetic presence is the one not always seen. Be the full moon, not the flickering street lamp. Be the wolf who howls once and disappears into the woods. Let your absence remind them of your value, because presence without purpose is erosion. We live in a world where silence is mistaken for absence, where solitude is treated like illness, where a phone that doesn't light up becomes a symbol of failure. But here's the truth. We've never been more connected, and more starved for intimacy. We mistake likes for love, replies for resonance, validation for value. In this digital theater, we perform ourselves for invisible crowds, measuring worth by how often our names echo back to us. But what are we really connected to? Most of our conversations are echoes, empty affirmations passed around like cheap currency. Connection built on dopamine and distraction. You are not a status update, not a glowing screen, not a presence to be consumed in fragments. You are depth. And depth terrifies a shallow world. So it tries to flatten you, shrink you into digestible content, make you visible, predictable, controllable. But healing requires disconnection. Not forever, but long enough to hear your own voice again. You were not born to be always online, always replying, always available. You were born to vanish sometimes, to sit with yourself in the quiet of the unspoken, to remember that your soul cannot be streamed. There's a silence that doesn't suffocate. It sanctifies. A solitude that doesn't isolate. It initiates. Most people run from being alone because they fear what they might hear in the silence. But that silence? It's not empty. It's where the truth lives. Your truth, the one you buried beneath everyone else's expectations. In solitude, you meet the parts of you that don't beg to be liked. The parts that don't shapeshift. The parts that don't perform. You meet your essence. It's there, in the stillness, that you start to realize something painful and liberating. You were never broken. You were just surrounded by people who couldn't see you fully. You were not too much. You were too deep for shallow waters. And solitude, for all its ache, has never lied to you. Unlike the world, it doesn't clap when you betray yourself. It sits with you, holds you, asks nothing, and reveals everything. This is why solitude terrifies those who have built their worth on applause. But for you, it is a mirror, a reintroduction, a resurrection. You are not lonely, you are alone with your truth. And that is sacred. To be mysterious in a world obsessed with exposure is rebellion. To be detached in a culture addicted to performance is liberation. But this kind of detachment isn't cold. It's clarity. It's the deep knowing that not everyone should have access to you. That your energy is not public property. That your soul is not open seating. Boundaries are not walls. They are filters. They don't keep love out. They keep distortion out. They protect the sacred parts of you that were never meant to be consumed, only cherished. Mystique is not manipulation. It is preservation. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop inviting misunderstanding. When you stop proving your worth, you remember that it was never up for debate. Let them wonder. Let them misunderstand. Let them invent stories to fill in your silence. Because in that silence, you are not vanishing. You are becoming. Psychologist Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And who you truly are will not be understood by everyone. But that's not a flaw. It's a filter. There is a darkness in you. Not evil, but forgotten. Not destructive, but denied. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of the psyche that holds everything we were told not to be. The anger you weren't allowed to feel. The boundaries you were punished for setting. The brilliance you dimmed to keep others comfortable. All of it exiled into the unconscious. All of it screaming for reintegration. You became a people pleaser not because you were weak, but because you were afraid. Afraid that love meant obedience. That belonging required self-erasure. So you amputated your power to wear the mask of goodness. But now you feel the weight of the mask. You feel the ache of the exiled self. The soul is not interested in being liked. It wants to be whole. Shadow work is not about becoming darker. It's about becoming real. It's standing in front of the mirror and saying, "I betrayed myself, and I forgive me. I abandoned my truth, and I am returning." To heal is not to light a candle and sing. It is to sit with the wolves you locked in the basement and say, "Come, walk with me." You cannot become free by hiding your fire. Sometimes the most sacred thing you can do is disappear. Not out of bitterness, not in vengeance, but in reverence. There is a point in every seeker's life where the soul demands retreat, not to escape the world, but to stop being shaped by it. Gurdjieff once wrote, "If you wish to get to heaven, you must first learn to separate yourself from people who are pulling you toward hell." And hell isn't always fire. Sometimes it looks like comfort, familiarity, the places where your soul goes numb. Withdrawal is not weakness. It is sacred resistance. It is reclaiming your rhythm from the machinery of performance. In the silence of retreat, you begin to remember what the noise made you forget. You were never meant to be always visible. You were meant to be true. Inward is not down. It is home. And when you go inward, you begin to shed every borrowed identity, every inherited belief, every false self built for survival. The more you pull back from the world, the more you hear the whispers of the soul. And what it says is simple, terrifying, and divine. This is who you've always been. We are taught to speak to be heard, to show up to be seen, to explain ourselves so no one misunderstands. But silence is not absence. It is authority. Distance is not detachment. It is definition. And presence, true presence, is not loud. It is unmistakable. Those who command the most respect are not the ones who always speak, but the ones who choose their moments with precision. The tree doesn't beg the forest to notice it. The storm doesn't apologize before it strikes. And you were not made to be accessible at all times. To everyone. You are not obligated to participate in your own diminishing. Seneca said, "Withdraw into yourself as far as you can." Not to isolate, but to center. Because the world respects what it cannot consume. It honors what it cannot predict. It is drawn to what does not beg. When you become less available, you become more powerful. When you speak less, your words weigh more. When you step back, your gravity increases. In a culture that confuses noise with value, learn to weaponize your silence. Not as punishment, but as proof that your energy is earned, not owed. There is a sacred clarity that only comes when you are gone long enough for the world to forget who they thought you were. Disappearing isn't erasure. It's resurrection. You don't vanish to hide. You vanish to shed. To peel off the masks that have grown onto your skin. To silence the voices that told you who to be. To return to the sound of your own breath. Your own blood. Your own becoming. When you finally step back, truly step back, you begin to hear your soul again. At first, it's faint. A flicker. A whisper in the static. But then it grows. And it says things you forgot you knew. You don't need to prove yourself. You don't owe your essence to anyone. You are not what they project onto you. The world teaches you to perform. But the soul only wants you to remember. And what you'll remember in that silence is not some grand new identity, but the quiet truth you've always known. That you were never meant to be this exposed. That you are most powerful when you are unseen. That your soul is not a spectacle. It is a sanctuary. Disappearing is not the end of your story. It is the page before the real one begins. To choose yourself is to commit a quiet revolution. Not the kind they write stories about. Not the kind that earns applause. But the kind that shatters mirrors, burns scripts, and walks away from stages where you were only ever allowed to play a role. When you choose yourself, you may lose everything that once defined you. The praise, the people, the places that only loved the version of you that served them. And yes, it will hurt. Because grief always follows liberation. But here's the truth no one tells you. The world doesn't need the mask you wore. It needs the soul you buried. When you disappear, you don't vanish. You reform. You return. Not to them, but to the wilderness inside you. You are no longer who they remember. And that is your power. Because rebirth demands forgetting. It demands silence. It demands the death of the persona, so that the being can rise. Nietzsche wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." You are that chaos, and that star. So if the world no longer recognizes you, let it stare in confusion. Let it grieve your ghost. Because you didn't come here to be understood. You came here to become. And if that means walking alone through shadow and silence, then so be it. Some roads can only be walked by those brave enough to leave everything behind, in order to meet the one person they've never truly known, themselves. There comes a moment, quiet, imperceptible, When the noise fades, the mirrors crack, and you no longer ache to be seen. Because finally, you see yourself, not as a reflection in someone else's gaze, not as an echo of old expectations, but as a sovereign flame, untamed, unnamed, and unafraid. You can't heal in the place that broke you, but you can rise from its ashes. And in that rising, you become something more than healed. You become whole. Beat of silence. Disappear. Reclaim your name in the dark. Let the world wonder where you went. Because where you're going, not everyone can follow.